Throughout history, every empire has looked its people in the eye and promised the same thing. Your money is safe. Your wealth will last forever. Our currency cannot be broken. Every government, from ancient kingdoms to modern superpowers, has sworn the same oath. Trust us. No force on earth can shake the value of our money. And yet, every single time, history has risen to prove them wrong. Rome, once ruler of half the world, ended with silver coins so debased they were little more than tin. Revolutionary France, waving the banners of liberty and equality, collapsed under paper so worthless that even farmers refused to trade bread for it. And in our own century, Lebanon gave us the same brutal reminder: life savings trapped in banks, salaries evaporating overnight, and entire futures stolen as if they never existed. Collapse is not an accident. Collapse is not rare. Collapse is the rule. The real question isn't if it happens again. The question that should haunt you is, will you be ready when it does? Because the most dangerous financial mistake you can ever make is believing money is permanent. The Byzantine Empire lasted 1,000 years longer than Rome, and at the heart of its survival was a coin, the gold solidus. For centuries, this coin was so reliable that merchants from Europe to Asia accepted it without question. It was the closest thing the medieval world ever had to a global reserve currency. But here's the twist. The Byzantines knew exactly what had destroyed Rome: the silver denarius, debased until it was barely tin. They should have remembered that lesson. Instead, they repeated it. Little by little, the solidus was shaved, mixed with cheaper metals, stretched thinner. At first, no one noticed. But then, trust cracked. The coin that once anchored Mediterranean trade became just another imperial illusion. Debasement destroyed credibility, the economy with it. And who survived? Not the citizens who trusted government promises, not the loyal subjects who kept holding the coin. The survivors were the merchants who had already doubted, those who quietly hoarded real gold or land outside imperial reach. Lesson 1. Governments cannot resist the temptation to dilute their money. And when they do, wealth runs to assets they can't counterfeit. In the mid-13th century, Europe faced the deadliest pandemic in its history, the Black Death. In just 4 years, half the continent was gone. Cities emptied, villages vanished, trade collapsed. But here's the surprising part. The economic story wasn't just catastrophe, it was transformation. When half the labor force disappears, labor becomes priceless. Survivors could demand wages they never dreamed of. Food and land, once scarce, suddenly became cheap. Families with silver, goods, or simply the ability to work, found themselves in a buyer's market. Abandoned homes, empty fields. Property that once cost a fortune could be taken for a fraction. And if that sounds familiar, it should. During COVID, supply chains broke, governments printed trillions, and inequality exploded. Those with liquidity snapped up assets, property, stocks, businesses, while millions struggled just to pay rent. The rhyme across centuries is brutal and clear. Pandemics don't just kill people, they redistribute wealth. They always have. And the winners? The survivors who had reserves. The losers? Those who didn't. In the 1340s, Florence wasn't just a city. It was Europe's financial capital, the Wall Street of the Renaissance, the Bardi, the Peruzzi. Banking dynasties so powerful they financed kings. And their biggest client? Edward III of England. But when Edward defaulted on massive war loans, the unthinkable happened. The banks collapsed. Depositors were wiped out. Trade froze. Florence, once rich and thriving, was plunged into chaos. For ordinary citizens, the lesson was brutal. Size was not safety. Reputation was not protection. Too big to fail. It was a lie then, and it's a lie now, because institutions don't exist to save you. They exist to profit, and when they go down, they'll take your savings with them. From the crash of Florence, to Lehman Brothers in 2008, to Lebanese banks locking deposits in 2019, the pattern hasn't changed. Lesson. Survival belongs to those who recognize that an institution's promise lasts only until the day it doesn't. The American Civil War is remembered for its battles and politics. But behind the smoke and speeches was another war, a financial one. Both the Union and the Confederacy faced the same problem. War on that scale was expensive, so both printed money. In the North, it was greenbacks, paper not backed by gold, only by the promise of the United States. At first, patriotic, bold, but as more flooded the economy, their value sank. Inflation spread, trust cracked. In the South, it was worse. The Confederacy printed graybacks in staggering amounts. By the end of the war, inflation wasn't just high, it was apocalyptic. Prices soared thousands of %. Soldiers' salaries were worthless before they could be spent. Families carried bags of bills that could barely buy bread. By 1865, Confederate currency wasn't weak. It was dead. And in that collapse, only hard assets mattered: land, food, gold. Paper promises became a cruel joke. For most Southerners, it was ruin. For opportunists with tangible goods, it was a fire sale opportunity. Here's the part Americans almost never hear. Your own country has already lived through a currency collapse. And when it happened, survival didn't come from the paper in your wallet, but from holding what the system could not inflate away. The 1790s. France was in chaos. The monarchy had fallen. The revolution was raging. To fund itself, the new government seized church lands and printed a new currency, the assignats. On paper, it looked solid, backed by confiscated property. In reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Because once the presses started rolling, they didn't stop. Every new note diluted the last. Prices spiraled upward. Wages couldn't keep up. Soon, the assignat was worthless. Farmers refused paper, demanding silver or goods instead. And in Paris, bread riots returned as hunger spread. The revolution didn't just eat kings, it devoured its own money. And who survived? Not the patriots clutching worthless notes, but those who held what the government couldn't print: food, gold, land. For the ordinary Parisian, the lesson was cruel and late. Promises, no matter how noble, are only worth what others will accept. When trust breaks, savings don't fade slowly, they vanish. In 1997, a small crack in Thailand's currency became an earthquake across Asia. It started with the Thai baht. Thailand had borrowed heavily in US dollars, confident its currency peg would hold. But when the peg broke, debts in foreign currency became impossible to repay overnight. Investors fled. Currencies across Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea collapsed in a chain reaction. Economies shrank. Unemployment soared. Governments lined up at the IMF's door begging for rescue. But the real victims weren't the hedge funds who triggered the panic. It was ordinary citizens. Savings lost value. Mortgages doubled in cost. Jobs evaporated. Meanwhile, those who held dollars or assets abroad survived, even thrived. And Wall Street walked away with fire sale deals on Asian assets. What looked like a local collapse was actually a global transfer of wealth. Lesson: debt in someone else's currency is a trap. When the storm hits, it isn't the creditor who drowns, it's the debtor. Between 2019 and 2021, Lebanon showed the world something most people still can't imagine. The banks simply locked the doors. Overnight, deposits were frozen, withdrawals capped, and as the Lebanese pound collapsed, savings lost more than 90% of their value. A lifetime of work, reduced to pocket change. Crowds lined up outside branches, begging for their own money, only to be told it was gone. Not just the poor, middle-class families, retirees, doctors, engineers, anyone who trusted the system was wiped out. The lesson was brutal. Your bank account isn't a vault. It's a loan you've made to an institution that can decide, in a crisis, not to pay you back. And who survived? The few who had diversified abroad. Those who held gold, property, or cash outside the system. Everyone else was trapped. So how do you survive when everything falls apart? History shows there's no single answer, but the patterns are clear. In Byzantium, it was gold. After the Black Death, it was liquidity to buy abandoned land. In Florence, it was refusing to trust too-big-to-fail bankers. In the Confederacy, it was food and hard goods. In France, It was property that paper couldn't replace. In Asia, it was avoiding debt in someone else's currency. In Lebanon, it was getting money out before the banks shut their doors. The details change. The lesson does not. Survival doesn't come from blind trust in paper or institutions. It comes from recognizing what holds real value when illusions collapse. And here's the paradox. Collapse is both tragedy and opportunity. For the unprepared, it's ruin. For those with liquidity, resilience, or assets that can't be printed away, it's the moment to seize wealth at a fraction of the cost. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners. After 2008, those with cash bought homes while millions lost theirs. Collapse always transfers wealth. The only question is, will you be on the losing side or the winning one? And remember, wealth isn't only what you own, it's what you can do. The baker who could still provide bread, the craftsman who could repair tools, the farmer who could feed a community, the merchant who could move goods across borders. These people didn't just survive collapses, they rose in them. In every crisis, money loses meaning. Production never does. That's the deeper protection. Not hoping governments or banks will save you, but combining real assets, real skills, and the awareness that illusions always collapse. Every crisis is a transfer. From the many who trusted, to the few who prepared, from paper promises, to tangible value, from passive savers, to active builders. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.